My friend and I made a journey from Iowa to Colorado via the Backstates. Crossed into Ubyuland after passing through Council Bluffs. Here that Ubyuland is practically a carbon copy of Nebraska, except the only major difference being the new Fort Dodge Rift. Decide to stick to the south since we heard the toll bridge over the rift was always congested as fuck. Past some odd looking towns where they stack caravans on top of each other to create these makeshift high-rise buildings, you could see in some areas how parts had fallen down. Didn't pass a single state trooper on the way through. Next up was Jintask. The sky is dark from Sud, we saw this coming on our way in from Ubyuland. Practically a wasteland state, the biggest features are the huge train tracks for the massive trains that transport ores from Ubyuland down to Glade. My friend points out how there are the odd shanty town communities set up occasionally along the tracks. Get to a gas station to refuel. Dude behind the counter was a normal looking dude. He warned us to keep away from the shanty towns, which he calls the scrapmen at all costs. Turns out that they're outcasts from herds and retie. They scavenge shit that falls off the trains and won't hesitate to kidnap us and scrap our car for a quick buck. Ask him how he survives in this gas station in the middle of nowhere. He tells us that he is paid to live there for 2 months. At the end of this, someone will arrive, take his place, and he'll return home, in his case, back to Loste. Also says that there are other stations like his. They're also tasked with keeping track of the scrapmen and making sure they don't wander too far. Sticking south we hit Tender. Had already researched the capital Cohen and it sounded safe enough to stop overnight. Greater than 30 minutes arriving into Tender you hit the Blue Forest. Rainy as fuck, and almost sundown with barely any light, it was spooky as fuck. Occasionally our headlights would hit the eyes of some of the whatever the fuck were in the trees. We would occasionally find a broken down car by the side of the road, each and every time nature had already claimed it. At last we hit the outskirts of Cohen. It's a big walled city about the size of Des Moines. We find a reputable hotel and crash for the night. Next morning we're eating breakfast. Meet someone making the trip from Ramos to Oklahoma. Tells us that he's uprooting and leaving for the States since Ramos has gotten way too expensive to live. Also tells us to avoid the border with Upends since it's migration season. Don't quiz him on it but take his advice nonetheless. We tell him of our journey to Colorado. He tells us that the journey west is safer up until we get to Galrafona. Just tells us to check our bags. Thank the guy, and pack up our stuff. Head out of Cohen. Another drive through about 4 hours of weird fucking dark jungle woodland. 10 AM and it's so fucking dark. Eventually we leave the forest and cross the border into Loste. Loste is quite arid and flat but that's not the weird part. The settlements, entire cities, are all inside these huge self-contained apartment blocks easily a few hundred meters high, kind of like that one city in Alaska. We learn that this is actually to do with some weird law which prices and taxes properties based on the physical footprint of the structure. People decided a good way to cheat the system was for everyone to build these massive apartment complexes. Everyone would pay a fraction of the rent to the owner of the blocks, usually a company, which would allow people to own fairly large apartments for a very low cost. We never bothered to pull into one of these blocks since we had loaded on fuel and food back in Cohen, but it was a surreal sight nonetheless. Apart from those, Loste is a pretty boring backstate. We make it to the Discland border, but only residents or permit holders can enter. Never mind, we turn around and head for Yerst. Enter Yerst. Very similar to Loste in the geography but there are actually normal towns now. Decided to stop in one of these places to rest and stretch our legs. Town is completely fucking empty. We figured at first it was a ghost town, but then we noticed how well maintained everything looked. The shops were all stocked, the roads looked at least serviceable. But not a soul in sight. All of a sudden, I hear my friend cry, "What the fuck?" Turn round to see him backpedaling it to the car while looking all around. Ask what's wrong. Don't get an answer. We end up back in the car, and he floors it out of there. Ask what the fuck is going on. He says you didn't hear that loud screaming. Nope. Decide not to stop again if we can help it. This was a good idea, since we passed about half a dozen towns which looked exactly identical to the first one, also all completely empty. We'd been driving straight for a fucking long time now, but somehow the sun was still up. Either we were just sleep deprived or something fucky was up. Get to the Cloame border. As soon as you cross from Yerst into Cloame, the geography changes almost instantly. 1 minute arid deserts, the next minute Florida tier swamp. We notice there's actually a bunch more traffic on the road than normal. First town we passed through seemed to be bustling with activity. Pull over into a bar, everyone inside gives us that look. Hear someone mutter more outlanders. Sit down at a table, table service, fuck yeah. Waitress asks us what we'd like, menu is completely alien to us, so she says that she'll do us a staple dish. She returns with what looks like 2 burgers. Bite into burger. It's the most fucking succulent meat I've ever tasted, an incredibly earthy flavor, but it was good. Ask what the meat is. Fryer beast, of course. Okay. Turns out fryer beasts are these cow-like animals the size of dump trucks. Big part of the Cloame identity is going out hunting these big fuckers. Tell the waitress that we're headed for the Galrafona border. Immediately her expression changes. Best of luck to use, all I can say is keep one in the chamber for the skidders. The what now? She explains that the entire state of Galrafona and half of Ozarks is basically an ecological disaster. Some genius used black magic and made these abominations called skidders. Waitress described them as a cross between a man, a cat, and a drawer full of knives. We leave and head for a motel across the road. Stay overnight, but I'm restless as fuck knowing what we're about to do. Morning comes, we refuel, and make the 3-hour drive to the border. As we're getting close, we notice that there is a massive traffic jam. We're in traffic for hours as we slowly inch closer to the border. As we get close, we notice the massive 80-foot wall. It's absolutely huge. We cross through a kiosk which explains the procedure of crossing Galrafona. 2 or more people per vehicle, maintain 50 miles per hour, don't stop, have a full tank of gas before you cross the border, have a gun and someone trained to use it. We're not randomly pulled for inspection, but we pass all the criteria anyway. They let vehicles go through in groups of 3, all in a horizontal line. We get paired up with an SUV with tinted windows and a pickup truck with 2 dudes sat in the back. We are directed towards one of the gates and enter an airlock. Gate closes behind us, and we wait for about 5 minutes. Gate opens in front of us to reveal Galrafona. I'm back, sorry about dipping out. Galrafona is again, another wasteland. Except this time, you can see that life is struggling to survive rather than it being an arid desert, think Fallout style. We immediately set off and make the 5-hour or so journey across the Backstates. We're heading for the Onfram border. Occasionally you'll pass ruined cars, old rundown remains of what used to be towns, and what remains of the old road system before the only roads were what linked the states on the east Galrafona to the states on the west. Scanning the horizon, I kept seeing these brown-black figures. They're moving parallel to us. Immediately know what the fuck is up. Tell my friend to chamber around just in case. We don't see much apart from this huge radio mast that was hundreds of meters tall. It was in ruins, and used to obviously be taller. There was also a part where the road that took you from Onfram to Cloame came really close to us, so we gave a wave to those heading in the other direction. It's beginning to get into the late afternoon when I catch myself daydreaming. I snap back into reality and realize that there are only 2 cars. Our car, and the black SUV. The pickup truck is nowhere to be seen. Me or my friend didn't even hear or see anything. It could have disappeared just then, or it could have been an hour ago. All of a sudden I notice that those figures on the horizon? Well, there's a lot more of them now. Can see them more clearly, They're roughly human-shaped but they move on all fours like a cat. We're faster than them, thank God, but there's something very unnerving about knowing that if our engine just decided to stop working for any reason then we would be dead. It's getting dark, but we can see a faint glow in the distance. It's on-frame, thank fuck. As we approach the massive border wall, the spotlights atop the wall focus in on us. We drive into this really long tunnel and a door slams shut just as we make it in. Never breathed a bigger sigh of relief. Come up to another kiosk, where our car is searched by men in what look like old GI uniforms. We're given the all clear, and we drive out of there. I never did see who or what was in that black SUV. Never mind, me and my friend decide we should find somewhere to get drunk to celebrate not being dead. A few minutes into on-frame we realize it's very much like Cloame. Packed full of people getting ready to make the crossing through Galrafona. We take what looks like an interstate and keep heading eastward until we hit a town. It was hilly, but you could tell that it was going to get more hilly the more east you went. We came across this town which was partially built over this huge gully, like half of the town was a bridge. We find a normalish looking bar and head inside. We notice that everyone is wearing either a blue, orange, or purple jumpsuit. All have numbers on the back. Dawns on us that we probably just walked into a colony of escaped convicts. We turn a couple of heads, but apart from that nobody seems to give a shit that we obviously don't belong here. Roll up to the bar and ask the dude behind what they're serving. Beer. Ask what kind of beer. My beer. Of course the bar in the town full of escaped convicts is also a microbrewery. Ask the dude what's with the jumpsuits. He explains that before Galrafona was annihilated, there was a large prison called Dresden. After what they called the day of sentencing, which was the first day, the skitters began wreaking havoc across that part of Galrafona. In the panic, a large number of prisoners managed to escape. They made it to on-frame, and built a settlement over an abandoned bridge. This was 80 years ago, so the people here now were the descendants of the original prisoners. The people seem friendly enough, but my friend and I decided that getting drunk with these people just pushing our luck too far. We managed to get a nice room though. On the wall were posters for whatever existed of Galrafona before the day of sentencing. Rolling hills, trees, meadows, and gentle rivers, looked almost like paradise. Next day we wake up early. Refuel and bid the town, which we learned was called Free Dresden, farewell. We decided to head south into Binrie instead of going straight to Green Rock since we'd heard about the golems that inhabit Green Rock. A very uneventful drive through on-frame led us to Binrie. Binrie was basically on-frame but warmer. Not many people had decided to settle here because the ground was just too soft for any permanent foundation. You'd occasionally see the odd attempt at a house, which was half consumed by the mud. It wasn't even swampy or particularly wet, but the mud just liked to slowly swallow in whatever was on top of it. Only reason trees managed to not sink was their vast above-ground roots that made driving hellish. As we approached open sky we hit what looked like a solid road, and then all of a sudden we were 300 feet above the ground on this huge bridge. It was like someone had just erased a massive chunk of land. We were suspended on a bridge over this huge empty square-shaped basin. None of us were particularly scared of heights, but it was unnerving how there were clouds below us. 4 miles we drove over this basin. Once we reached the end, we saw the "Welcome to Open Sky" sign. We cross into open sky. Didn't mention this prior, but the dude in the convict bar back in Free Dresden mentioned the existence of a settlement built around some old ass ruins. Open sky mostly resembles the forests of Northern California, but about halfway through the state it opens up into rolling hills devoid of trees. Heading into this part of the state we come across the first sign of civilization we've seen since we entered. A fairly medium-sized town, but it looks like it's from the 1800s. People are still using gas lamps, traveling on horses, etc. They were unfazed by our car. Guess they were probably just Luddites, but they looked human and normal. We park up and head to the bar, or the saloon in this case. Place is pretty dead save for the bartender and a couple of vagabond looking types in the corners of the room. Ask the bartender where we are. Says the place is called Old Town and gave me a basic rundown of the place. Says the town has a dark history with magic, the occult, and was cursed. He said it had something to do with the elder settlers, the apparent ancestors to the Native American tribes of today. These elder settlers came from a different plane of existence, but they brought many of the predatory spirits from their plane with them when they crossed into our dimension. Apparently, the Backstates were created when they were sealed off from normal reality to contain these malevolent spirits, but of course, it wasn't perfect, and entities can slip in and out, which explains paranormal sightings such as wendigos, skinwalkers, etc. He says this is old folk tales, but it's a tale nonetheless. We also managed to deduce that this was the place that convict barman mentioned back in. Ask the barman why the town looked like it was out of the 1800s. Tells us that he doesn't know, it's just always been like this for him. Says that for over 1,000 years our ancestors have lived in these buildings. Meaning that at one point, the town was futuristic, but now it has fallen behind? Whatever, we get 2 rooms for the night. He accepted modern money since it's the only way he can earn cash trading with travelers. Up and early next morning as usual, get breakfast, set off. We're running lowish on fuel, but the barman let us know that at the tri-state point with open sky, Ubyuland, and New Fruster there is a large settlement called Calanah which they often trade with. We follow the surprisingly well-kept road to the tri-state. Few more hours of driving, but worth it to see a new place. As we get closer we see small settlements begin to spring up. Further we get, the more built up the settlements are. Eventually we get into the city center. Looks very modern, there's shops that you would recognize from our world except they're off. Kinda like those bootleg stores you get in China or other third world countries. Next thing you notice are the people. Everyone is just walking around nonsensically. Sometimes people pause, stand there for a few seconds, then continue with whatever they were doing. People speak in a way that it sounds like they're reading it off a script, very unnatural. The whole place gave weird early/mid 2000s video game vibes. Friend and I pull up to a gas station. That's when we notice the very center of the city. A large skyscraper with a green S on it. Top of the skyscraper covered in radio dishes and antennas. No windows at all, just a big concrete slab of a building. No other buildings around it nearly as tall as this one. With a full tank, we get back in the car and take the ring road towards Ubyuland. Entering Ubyuland, you're greeted with plenty of warnings about volcanic activity. This state was basically New Mexico crossed with Montana and Hawaii. Not long upon entering Ubyuland you find the air is heavy and thick. The massive amount of sulfur dioxide and carbon monoxide can fuck you up here. Scorched cars can be seen every 10 to 20 miles or so. Gotta be careful not to end up down the bottom of the valley where red hot lava flows like rivers. How this had managed to exist right next to a Garden of Eden such as open sky is beyond me. Maybe that's where open sky got its name. A lot of abandoned mines here. We saw a bunch of signs warning against looting. For obvious reasons, we didn't find a gas station to fill up here, so we found a spot high up on a hill where the breeze was cooler and enjoyed some lovely Calanah gas station food. More of the same until we hit Plachi. Plachi is basically Ubyuland save for the lava rivers and volcanoes. By the look of the few settlements we passed, it had only recently been settled. Past a town that sat on the precipice of a huge quarry. Decide to pull in and restock on food and gas. We find a parking lot that overlooks the edge of the quarry. Amazing views for miles. That's when we notice something weird. You cannot see the bottom of the quarry. That shit was so far down and deep that the bottom was cloaked by darkness. Didn't feel possible, since it was broad daylight and it should have all been lit. We find a gas station and fill up. We decide to buy a pair of jerry cans and fill them with gas too, just in case we find ourselves in another open sky situation. We go to pay for gas. The woman behind the counter looks about 100 years old. Instantly clocks that we're outsiders, tells us not to stare into the pit. We ask why. Once it stares back, it's got you for good. What the fuck? Pack car full of food and gas and hightail the fuck out of there. Friend gets the smart ass idea to go north to check out Lake Doramos. Is this motherfucker serious? We hit the border of central Trankland. Border security rolls up. Two guys with exaggerated body proportions roll up and warn us that the ongoing portal storm in the east of the state is peaking in intensity. Tell us of risk of sudden vacuum incidents or SVIs, where portals will straight up pop out right on top of you and suck you into wherever they lead to. Because of the portal storm, whole communities have been cut off from the main highway through the state. Nothing you can do to avoid a potential run-in with the portal. Our option was either face a portal storm or go through Judas's, where humans are hunted for food by the locals and the wildlife consists of giant one-eyed chickens. Portal storm it is. Journey actually goes pretty smoothly. We did witness a portal rip right through the highway a few miles ahead of us. Road was untouched but took about 50 or so cars with it. Pretty fucking metal. Clear the portal storm and reach faster. Faster, of all the Backstates, probably has some of the richest but weirdest culture of all. The south is snowy covered, whereas the north is more temperate. Had knowledge before entering not to interact with locals and only enter shops or hotels marked with a green diamond. You could write many books on the weird shit and mythology of this state. It's getting dark, and cold. We pass into a town in the lower parts of the mountains and spend the night in this very cozy log cabin type place, and yes, it was marked with a green diamond. Got harassed by a local on the way out. We barely understood him but he sounded very pissed off. For our own safety we decided to forget the Lake Doramos plan and just go straight east to Colorado. Next backstate up was Doster. Doster was the playground of the Doster Giants. Sounds like a football team, but a Doster Giant is what happens when you take the locals from Judas's, do some genetic fuckery with them in Healthland, and let them loose. Greater than 200-foot tall troll-like monsters, they were very slow but they could fuck you up if you didn't respect their space. Despite this, we actually saw quite a lot of settlements in Doster, especially near the border with Faster. Apparently plenty of cryptid hunters base in Doster and head into Faster and Judas's. Doster is pretty safe unlike the other two, so it provides a solid staging ground. Apart from that, Doster is pretty normal, very reminiscent of your usual Midwestern state. Only weird part was the area of Doster which juts out, called the Shelf by Backstaters. We were told to keep well away, as the Shelf was basically a dumping ground used by Healthland, plenty of biohazards there, and it's theorized to be the birthplace of the Doster Giants. It used to be a part of Healthland, but they sold it to Doster for pennies on the dollar with the deal that anything valuable they found could be sold back to them, but Doster would still be in charge of cleanup. Ended up being a massive loss for Doster. Turns out the mess that is the Shelf is a lot more hassle than it's worth. We keep well out of the way of the Shelf and head towards New Nantes. But not before a quick refuel and dinner break at a nice little inn we found. Lady who owned the inn says that New Nantes is geometrically esoteric. Just stick to the IB-145 and we should make it to Ronald. We enter New Nantes. Sure enough, there's some fuckery at work here. Your perception of space is so warped here, that what looks like a curved path is actually a straight line. The IB-145 road seems like it's turning right forever, but you never end up back where you were. Road signs are also in complete gibberish. All of a sudden it's like we're going downhill, but we keep going downhill more than is actually possible. So long as we kept driving on this road we would be fine though. Right? My friend and I discussed what it would be like to get lost on in this state. Or even if it's possible to learn to live in this state. As we get closer to the border with Ronald, things start to clamp down. Entering Ronald, the first thing that hits you is the smell. Must be some of the local flora in bloom. Apart from that, a pretty normal state. Heard some weird things about the food though. We stop at a gas station, fill up and truck on. Almost at the border with Nebraska. We decide to leave the Backstates one state early. Also because we also heard that it's best you leave the backstate in the equivalent place you entered. We cross into Nebraska. All is well, and we breathe a sigh of relief. Find a place to turn around. Cross over the bridge to Iowa. Back in Council Bluffs like nothing ever happened.